Kiddushin Daf Chaf Ches continues the Gemara's discussion of kinyanim and how they work. We'll have three sugyas divided by two mishnayos. The first sugya until the first mishnah is discussing that of Gilgul Shvua. And the first mishnah introduces the topic of chalipin, and then we'll get to kinyanim, to rishus of hektish. So let's begin. The Gemara has been discussing Gilgul Shua, which means that you have a situation where you have a case against somebody, but you cannot force him to swear, pi halacha. But if you can force him to swear about something else, then you can do what's called Gilgul Shua, force him to swear about this other thing as well, although independently you could not have made him swear for that. So we've already discussed different types of shua so that you can make someone swear. Mara's question now is, what about a situation where you have a claim against him, but you're a suffix, you're not sure about your claim? Had you been sure, you would have been able to make him swear, but you can't. An example Rashi brings is where you have a dispute between two partners or an oris and the owner, and they're not sure how to divide things, and you can only make him swear if you're a vadeh. If you're a suffix, you can't. However, if you have a different shua, you can be a megalgal, make him swear for it. So Mer says that the source is because we have a hekish, we have a seir shava between the term shvua, which is written by a saita, and the term shua, which is written by a shua sashemrim. The Gemara calls it inside and outside. The shvua of the saita happens inside the Beis HaMikdash. The shvua of the shemrim happens outside the Beis HaMikdash. They both say shvua. And the link between the two is that just like by a saita, we consider a suffix situation to be a vadai. That is, she has the halachos of vadai even before anything is established, as we learn the halachos of suffix tuma from there. So therefore, the same thing applies by other types of shua outside the Beis HaMikdash. We have the same halachos of a suffix as a vadai, and therefore, even if you only have a suffix, you still get the Gilgul Shua halacha. So Gemara then asks, so how far does this go? How much of a claim do you have to be able to make him swear on it? Can you just make something up and be able to make him swear? Or do you have to be a real vadi? You have to have a serious claim? How far does this go? So the Gemara has two opinions. The Gemara quotes Rav Yehuda Rav, who says even if somebody just walks over to someone and says, "Swear to me that you're not my Eved Kenani." So ordinarily you wouldn't be able to do that, but through a Gilgul Shua, you could make him swear to that. So Gemara says that that's not correct, because you cannot accuse someone of being an Eved Kenani. You have a brisa that says if you make various accusations, you suffer because of them yourself. If you accuse someone of being an Eved Kenani, then he gets put into a cherem. If you accuse somebody of being a mamzer, he gets malchus. And if you accuse somebody of being a rasha, the court won't do anything to you, but that person's allowed to hate you forever. And he's allowed to even take steps to limit your income. So the Gemara therefore quotes Rava, who says it's not that he can make him swear that he's not your Eved Kenani, but you're making him swear that he's not your Eved Ivri, that he hasn't sold himself to you, and therefore he needs to work for you. So the Gemara asks, what's the chiddush in that? Why would I think that the Gilgul Shua wouldn't be able to go that far? What's special about that it would be logical that the Gilgul Shua should not apply there? All he's saying is that you need to work for me, that you owe me work, and that's just regular metaltalin. You should be able to swear on any regular metaltalin. So Gemara says Rava holds that the Eved Ivri's body belongs to its owner, and therefore it's not a question of metaltalin. The body of a person is not called metaltalin. It has the halacha of karka. It's just like land. And karka we know you can't swear on. This is to go even so far as to say that even karka you could make him swear, or even something which is like it, which is the body of an Eved Ivri. So Gemara says, so why is it any different than a karka itself? So Gemara says because karka happens quietly. It happens in private. And therefore, it's logical to make a person swear on that to somewhat through the Gilgul Shua, because it's possible that he owes it to you. There was a sale that happened, but we're not aware of it. However, a sale of an Eved Ivri usually is well known. Usually word spreads about that. So you may think you can't make him swear because we would assume, hey, if it's true, we would have known about it. And therefore the chiddush is, no, you could make him swear to that. Okay, this concludes this Gemara. Now we got to our next Mishnah, which introduces the topic of chalipin. So the Mishnah defines an object which can be acquired through chalipin as something which can be sold for money or can be traded for money. And it says that the halacha is as follows. When a person acquires what is being swapped for it, he acquires the thing himself. So let's define chalipin. Chalipin is when you have a kinyan of one object that is affected by the kinyan of another object. So The case the Mishnah brings is you have two people that are swapping a para for a shar. One owns a cow, one owns an ox. They want to switch. So when one person is kaina the ox, the other person is kaina the cow, wherever it is, even though it's not here. So you can change ownership of one thing by transferring something else. And we'll see there's a machlokes. If the two kinyanim head in the same direction, that's when Reuven transfers ownership of one thing to Shimon. Then something else transfers from Reuven to Shimon, or it's opposite directions. When Reuven wants to give the shor to Shimon, so Shimon acquires it when Reuven acquires the para from Shimon. It's the makneh affects the kinyan by being koineh something from the koineh of what he wants to give him. Now, the Mishnah here, therefore, brings an example of it, and he says if you have two people who want to swap shar for a para, or a chamor for shar, an ox for a donkey. So when the other one acquires the other object, even though it's not here, and therefore he takes full responsibility for it. If something happens to it from that moment on, it's his loss. It's not the loss of the person who originally owned it. The Gemara now begins, and the Gemara discusses the topic of using money for chalipin. So generally, we have a rule that you can't do chalipin with the money you're using to buy something. That is, if you're giving $100 for someone's ox, you can't say, okay, you take the $100 as chalipin for the ox, which comes to me when you take the $100. That doesn't work. That's a sale. And sale doesn't work to change ownership. As we've seen, we hold that kesef is not koineh. So the Gemara understands from this Mishnah that it says anything which is traded for money, that we're talking about where the chalipin is the object for the money. And it seems to say you could be doing chalipin for the money. Now, obviously, if this is money that you're buying the object, you can't. That we know you can't do. But the Gemara thinks that the chiddush here is you could use coins for chalipin. That's, I'm not using the chalipin as money to buy it, but I'm using it as coinage. I'm using the coin as an object of value to trade for this thing. And the chiddush is that you can use coins as chalipin if you're not using it for money, you're just using it as a valuable object. So the Gemara asks, but that's not the halacha. You shouldn't be able to use coins for a chalipin. Is this Mishnah teaching me that you can? So the Gemara says, if Yehuda answers, no, you're understanding it wrong. When it says anything which is traded for money, it doesn't mean anything that you're swapping the object for the money here. It means anything which needs to be evaluated for money when you want to trade it. It doesn't have an automatic worth. You have to figure out how much it's worth. And therefore, what it's referring to is metalfa. And it's referring to any kalim, food, objects, things which need to be evaluated. Anything, in short, anything except for coins. When you swap these things for each other, that's a classic chalipin. So the Gemara says, if you look carefully in the Mishnah, you see that's obviously true, because it goes on to talk about swapping a para for a shar. It doesn't talk about swapping a para for coins. So obviously we're talking about swapping metaltal. So Gemara asks, what was the havamina? What did we think when we thought that it was coins? How do we understand why the example that's brought is para for a shar? So Gemara says, we didn't think it was para and shar. We thought it was para meat and shar meat. And the chiddush is another thing. Besides the fact that you can use coins for chalipin, you can also use food for chalipin. And that's a chiddush in and of itself, because the pasuk that discusses chalipin is talking about shoes. And I would have think you can only use kalim for chalipin, like shoes. But to use food, fruits, things like that, you can't use those for chalipin. Says the Gemara, that's good according to Rav Sheshes, who holds that you could use food and non-kalim objects for chalipin. But according to Rav Nachman, who holds you can't. Yitaka could only use kalim for chalipin. How are you going to learn this? So the Gemara says, we're going to learn it completely differently. We're going to be referring to money, actually. The entire Mishnah is talking about money. It's not talking about kalim or food. And it's a chiddush in using chalipin for money. And there is one way in which you're allowed to do it. And what is that? That's if, let's say, Reuven sold his ox to Shimon. So Shimon did a meshicha on the ox. Now Shimon owes a money to Reuven. So Reuven says, you know what? Instead of paying me the money, I would like to buy a cow from you. So keep the money and instead give me a cow. And now that swap for that 100 zuz, for that mana, that Shimon owes Reuven, swapping for that, you're swapping the cow. But the obligation was there before the cow ever entered the picture. So Gemara says this works according to Rav Nachman, and it's based on the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan holds really midaraisa, if you buy something, as soon as you pay the money, you're kind of the object. It's the Rabbanan who said you can't, because they're afraid you're going to buy something, you'll pay the money, and you haven't picked it up yet. And in the meantime, the person who's holding it doesn't own it, you own it. Then if there's a fire or something, he's not going to take care of it. He's not going to put himself out to save it, because he doesn't stand to lose it. You stand to lose it. Therefore, they said you're not kind of until you actually acquire it. You have to get the object to make the kinyan. But in this case, it's rare that such a thing will happen, that you owe the money before you make the deal on the object. Here he owes the money for the axe, and then it turns it into the money for the cow. So, because of that, because it's a rare case, the Gzeir D'Rabbanan doesn't apply, and therefore we allow you to do this chalipin. We allow the money to be kleina on your behalf. So Gemara says, okay, so that was according to Rebbe Yochanan. Well, what's Rish Lakish going to say? Rish Lakish holds that it's midairaisa, you cannot be kleina with money. You don't have to do it with Mashiach, so there's no way that this type of arrangement could work. So if he holds like Rav Sheshes, that's good. But if he holds like Rav Nachman, that payros don't do any kinyan, so what's pshat in the Mishnah? So we're says we'll have to hold like Rav Sheshes. We now begin our next Mishnah, which discusses the halachos of Gvoya, that is property of Hektish. And the Mishnah gives 3 rules. It says that the acquisition of Hektish is always with the money. We'll see Drush and the Gemara, Hektish acquires with money, even though a Hedyet, the Mishnah says, only acquires with Mashicha or with Chazaka. As we've seen before, it's a Machlokes Yochanan V'Shalkish, whether that's D'Oraisa or D'Rabbanan, but that's the bottom line. A Hedyet, a regular person, only acquires with Mashicha, but Hektish acquires with money. When the money transfers, the property of Hektish transfers, either way. And the last halacha, the Mishnah says, is that if you promise something, just with your words, to give something to Hektish, it already belongs to Hektish. You can't back out of it. Now the Gemara quotes a brayso to explain it. What is it when we say that Hektish acquires with money? What does that mean? If the Gizbar, the representative of Hektish, pays for something, for an animal, even if the animal's on the other end of the world, it already belongs to Hektish. If it would be a Hedyet and you pay for something, you don't make any kinyan. It's not chal the kinyan until you actually do a acquisition. And when we say that you say something for Hektish, it's like it's already given. So if somebody says this ox is a carbon oila, or this house is Hektish, even if it's at the other end of the world, it already belongs to Hektish. If, however, it would be a Hedyet, it wouldn't go until he does a Mashiach on the cow and he does a Chazaka on the house. Next, the Gemara discusses what happens if there's a price change and you want to back out. So, if somebody's redeeming something from Hektish, Hektish owns an object and a person wants to give money and take the object. So, if he does a Mashiach on it while it has the value of a money, and he did not give the value yet and now went up to 200, so Hektish rules here, and Hektish, you don't acquire Hektish until you give the money, and therefore he didn't give the money, and therefore now he has to pay the higher price, the 200. How do we know that? The Brisa says the pasuk is v'nas and a kesef v'kam like. Redemption only happens when you give the money. Now, what if the opposite happens? What if he did the Mashiach and it was worth 200, and then it dropped in value before the money was given, and now it's down to 100? So according to what we just said, he should be able to lower his price to 100 because the kinyan is not chal until he gives the money. So here we say no. Here we say Hektish doesn't lose. Hektish can't be less than other people, and therefore he still has to give the 200 that was the original price, even though he wasn't kind of yet, and should be able to lower it. Hektish can't lose. Now, what if the opposite happens? What if he didn't do a kinyan? Instead, he gave the money first before doing a kinyan. So he gave the money, if he gave 200, and he didn't get a chance to redeem it. He didn't get a chance to actually do a kinyan on it until the price went down to 100. Still has to stick with his 200 zuz that he paid, because, like we said, Hektish is kaineh with the money. Again, v'nasan kesef v'kamloi. Now, what if the opposite happened? He redeemed it and he only paid 100, and he didn't get a chance to actually acquire it until it went up to 200. So now, based on what we said before, Hektish should be able to say, well, why should we lose? If the rules of Hektish, the acquisition should be stuck at 100. But since Hektish should never lose, you should apply the rules of a hedyot here. Since he didn't do the Mashiach yet, we could back out and make him pay the 200. So Gemara says no. The redemption actually happens, and you the 100 that you gave is all he has to give. Here you don't have to give the 200. Gemara says, why not? So Gemara says, because even in a hedyot, in a case like this, where he gave the money and you want to back out and change the price, he would get a mishapara. You would get a claim against him that's the wrong thing to do. So here also Hektish can't do that.